I never thought snow could turn into a kind of silent war, but that's exactly what it became in Cedar Hollow, Montana, and it all started with 3 mornings that looked completely normal until I realized someone had been quietly using my driveway like it didn't belong to me anymore, like my home was just part of their job site. And by the time I understood what was happening, it already felt personal in a way I didn't expect. My name is Evan Carter. I've lived on the edge of town for almost a decade. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom house with a long sloped driveway that meets a small access road running beside the Willow Creek residences, a mid-sized condo complex that looks harmless enough in summer, almost pretty actually, but in winter it turns into something else entirely. The first storm of the season hit like it always does, heavy, wet snow that sticks to everything. And when I went out that morning, I noticed a ridge of snow piled right at the end of my driveway. Maybe a foot high, nothing dramatic, just annoying, the kind of thing you shovel once and forget about. So that's what I did. I cleared it, went to work, didn't think twice. But the second storm was different, heavier, colder, the kind of snow that feels like it has weight. And when I came home that night, the ridge wasn't just there again. It was bigger, tighter, almost like it had been pressed in a place on purpose, nearly 2 feet high and packed so hard my shovel barely broke through it. I remember standing there in the headlights of my truck thinking, this doesn't feel right, not natural, not random. But I still didn't want to believe anything strange was going on. The third storm is when I started paying attention, really paying attention, because I got stuck halfway out of my driveway, tires spinning slightly, and I had to spend almost an hour clearing enough space just to get onto the road. And that's when I finally noticed something I wish I had seen earlier. The snow wasn't just coming from the city plow on the main road. It was being directed, almost guided, from the private lane next to my property, the one that belonged to Willow Creek residences. I watched the next snowfall from my living room window, coffee going cold in my hands, and I saw it clearly for the first time. The plow truck came down their private road first, cleaned their parking lanes neatly, almost carefully. Then the driver angled the blade just slightly, not enough to make it obvious unless you were looking for it, and pushed the entire edge of their snow right toward the mouth of my driveway, like it was the natural place for it to go, like my property was just the dump zone nobody had bothered to officially name. I stood there for a long time after that run, just watching the empty road, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it, because the alternative meant someone had been using my home as part of their cleanup routine without ever asking me. The next time I saw the plow, I went outside and flagged him down, cold wind cutting through my jacket, and when he rolled down the window, I tried to keep my voice calm. I pointed at the pile forming again and said, "Hey, you're blocking my driveway every time you push snow like that. You can't keep doing this." And he looked at me like I was just another complaint in a long day, shrugged a little, and said something I didn't expect. He said, "That's just the easiest push line, man. Everyone does it. We're not trying to target you or anything, just following the flow." And then he nodded like the conversation was already over and drove off before I could say anything else. That word stuck with me, flow, like snow had a natural direction, and mine just happened to be the place it ended up. I called the condo office that same afternoon, still trying to keep things reasonable, and I spoke to a woman named Sandra Lowell who managed the property. I explained what was happening, how the plow was dumping snow into my driveway every storm, and she listened politely, but there was a kind of distance in her voice, like she had heard versions of this complaint before and already decided where it usually ended. She told me their contractor was experienced, very professional, and it was unlikely they would do that intentionally. Then she added that sometimes city plows create these piles, and it just affects neighboring properties differently, like it was weather, not behavior. I remember hanging up and just sitting there for a while, staring out at the road again, feeling that strange shift where something stops being a misunderstanding and starts becoming a pattern. The next storm I decided to mark it, not out of anger yet, more like proof to myself I wasn't imagining things. So I went out before the snow started and placed bright orange stakes along the edge of my driveway, clearly on my side of the property line. Nothing aggressive, just visible markers, like a reminder that this space belonged to someone. When the plow came that night, I watched again from the window, and this time I saw him hesitate, just for a second. When he reached the stakes, the blade slowed, almost like he was acknowledging them, and then he still did it. He still angled the blade and pushed a heavy wave of snow directly across my entrance, burying the markers halfway, like they weren't even worth respecting. That was the moment something changed in me. Not anger exactly, more like clarity, because now it wasn't ignorance, it wasn't accident, it was choice. I set up a small camera the next day, nothing fancy, just a basic motion camera pointed toward the driveway and the road beyond it. And I told myself I just wanted to understand the pattern, not escalate anything. But deep down I already knew I was documenting something I might need later. 2 storms passed after that, and each time it was the same sequence. Plow clears the condo lot clean, turns slightly at the edge, dumps the leftover snow right into my driveway like it was a designated disposal point. No hesitation, no adjustment, just routine. I collected the footage, screenshots, timestamps, everything lined up too neatly to ignore, and I emailed it to the condo association with a short message explaining what I was seeing, expecting at least some acknowledgement, maybe even a call to clarify. But there was nothing, no response at all, not even a polite denial. That silence hit harder than the snow ever did, because it meant I wasn't dealing with confusion anymore. I was dealing with indifference, and that's a different kind of problem entirely. I remember sitting in my garage that night looking at my old snowblower, the one I bought years ago for storms that never felt this personal, and I kept thinking about how every pile they pushed into my driveway wasn't just blocking my car, it was saving them time, convenience, efficiency, and I was the cost of that convenience. That's when I started thinking differently about the situation, not emotionally, not as a fight, but as a system that only worked one way until something pushed back. I didn't act yet. I just watched one more storm roll in, heavier than the last, and I waited to see what they would do next, because I had a feeling I was about to find out how far this habit really went. The 4th storm arrived just after midnight, the kind that doesn't fall. It attacks, wind pushing snow sideways like it has intent, and I remember lying in bed listening to the faint scrape of plows somewhere out on the road, thinking about the footage I had already collected, thinking about the silence from the condo office, and thinking something I didn't fully admit out loud yet, that this wasn't going to fix itself. By morning, the world outside my window looked like it had been erased and rewritten in white. Every edge softened except the one place I cared about most, the end of my driveway, where the familiar ridge had already formed again, thicker this time, almost deliberate in its shape, like it knew exactly where to sit to cause maximum inconvenience without ever being officially wrong. I stepped outside and stood there for a moment in the cold, just looking at it, hearing the distant hum of the condo plow finishing its rounds, and I didn't feel surprised anymore. That was the strange part. I just felt confirmed, like I had finally stopped guessing and started observing something predictable. That day I didn't call anyone, didn't argue, didn't even shovel right away. I just watched from inside as the plow made its usual pattern in the evening, clearing the condo lanes clean, tight, efficient, and then doing that small, almost casual pivot at the edge of their property where the blade tilted just enough to send everything outward, into the same spot, my driveway mouth, like muscle memory. It wasn't dramatic. There was no villainous moment, no obvious aggression, just repetition, and somehow that made it worse. I went out later that night and shoveled again, slower this time, not because it was harder, but because I was thinking, and every scrape of the shovel felt like I was participating in something I didn't agree with anymore. The next morning I reviewed the camera footage again, frame by frame, and there it was, the same sequence, the same timing, the same angle of the blade, and I remember leaning back in my chair thinking this is what routine looks like when nobody questions it. That afternoon I got a call from Sandra Lowell at the condo office, her tone a little tighter this time, less patient, more defensive. She asked if I had been moving snow back onto their property, and I almost laughed because for a second it sounded like we were talking about children arguing over toys instead of machines reshaping half a street. I told her I hadn't moved anything onto anyone's property. I was simply dealing with what ended up on mine, and there was a pause on the line, a long one, before she said the contractor assured them everything was within normal operating procedure. Normal operating procedure, that phrase again, like repetition could turn impact into policy. I told her I had footage, multiple storms, clear angles, and she went quiet again, then asked what I wanted, not aggressively, but carefully, like someone trying to close a file without opening too many drawers. That's when I realized I had shifted from complaint to negotiation without ever intending to. I told her very simply, I want the plow to stop using my driveway as a dumping zone, and I want it in writing, nothing more, nothing less. There was another pause, shorter this time, and then she said she would speak to the contractor and that they would reevaluate the snow dispersal pattern near adjacent properties, which sounded polite but empty, like language designed to delay commitment. I hung up not satisfied, but not surprised either. The next storm came 2 nights later, and I decided I wasn't going to argue anymore. I was going to observe consequences instead. The plow did exactly what it always did, cleared the condo lot, moved cleanly along their lanes, then reached the familiar turning point, and I watched from my living room as the blade tilted, just slightly, and the snow rolled forward like a wave breaking at the same shore it always had. That night, I didn't shovel right away. Instead, I pulled my snowblower out of the garage, a heavy machine I hadn't used in years, the kind that makes a deep mechanical roar when it starts, and I stood there for a moment thinking not about revenge, but about balance, because that's what it felt like now. Not emotional anymore, just balance that hadn't been corrected. I waited until later, after I saw the condo lights settle and the parking lot go still, every car neatly tucked into its space like nothing had happened that day, and then I went out. The snow they had pushed into my driveway was thick, compacted, almost sculpted by repetition, and I started the snowblower and let it bite into the edge of it, feeding it slowly, deliberately, not rushing, just guiding it. And I didn't throw it anywhere random. I aimed it back toward where it came from, not aggressively, not wildly, just accurately, like returning a delivery that was misrouted. The machine roared in the cold air, and the snow arced out in wide, controlled bursts, landing along the outer edge of their lot, not on cars, not on doors, just along the same boundary where it had originated. And I remember thinking how strange it was that something so simple could feel so loaded. It took maybe 40 minutes, maybe less. Time started feeling different at that point, less like hours and more like sequences, and when I finished, my driveway wasn't just clear, it felt reset, like the system had briefly acknowledged itself. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was upset, but because I was waiting for what would happen next, because experience had already taught me that systems like this don't stay neutral for long once they've been interrupted. The next afternoon, I got another call from Sandra. But this time the tone had changed, less certainty, more curiosity mixed with frustration. She asked again if I had been redistributing snow, and I told her the same thing I had said before. I was returning what was placed on my property, and there was silence again, but this time it wasn't dismissive, it was calculating. She asked, slower, what exactly I wanted to happen going forward, and I told her again, clearly, no more dumping snow into my driveway, and a written agreement confirming it. And then I added something I hadn't planned to say earlier. If it continued, I would be billing them for removal costs, because at that point it wasn't personal anymore. It was labor, and labor has value. She didn't argue. She didn't push back. She just said she would escalate it internally. After that call, something shifted in the rhythm of the street, not immediately obvious, but noticeable if you were paying attention. The next time I watched the plow approach my property, I saw a hesitation that hadn't been there before. A small adjustment in the blade angle, a correction rather than a habit, and for the first time in weeks, the snow didn't end up in my driveway. It stopped at the edge, like it had learned a boundary existed there. And I remember standing by the window that night thinking how strange it is that nothing changes until someone makes it inconvenient to keep it the same. The next storm was lighter, almost gentle compared to the previous ones, but I still found myself watching the window more than I needed to. Like I didn't fully trust the silence yet, because once you've seen a pattern repeat enough times you start expecting it, even when there's no reason to. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold again, looking out at the driveway as snow started to settle. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel that tight pressure in my chest, because nothing was building up at the edge, nothing was being pushed into a problem before it could even become one. The plow came through the neighborhood late that night. I heard it from a distance, that low mechanical grind moving through quiet streets. And when it reached the condo complex, I stood up without thinking, just watching, waiting for that familiar angle, that familiar push. But it didn't come the same way anymore. There was a pause at the edge of their lot, almost like a correction, and the blade turned inward instead of outward, keeping everything contained within their own boundary. I didn't celebrate, not immediately, because part of me didn't trust it yet. But I did notice something simple. My driveway stayed clear. Completely clear. No ridge, no wall, no accidental pile waiting for morning frustration. The next morning I went outside just to check, half expecting to find a late-night mistake, but it was just snow, untouched, and evenly settled like the rest of the street. That's when Sandra Lowell called again, and this time her voice was different, less defensive, more measured, almost tired in a way that suggested this situation had taken more attention inside their office than anyone expected. She told me the contractor had been instructed to adjust their plowing pattern near adjacent property lines, and I remember asking, calmly, if that meant they understood what had been happening before, and she didn't answer directly. She just said they were moving forward with updated guidelines. That phrase stuck with me because it didn't admit anything, but it also didn't deny it anymore. After that, things settled into a strange kind of normal, the kind that only exists after conflict has been acknowledged without anyone ever fully saying the words out loud. The plow still came, the storms still came, but the behavior changed, subtle but consistent. The blades stayed slightly tighter to their own lot. The edges were cleaner, more controlled, like someone had finally measured the consequences of convenience and decided it wasn't worth it. My driveway became just a driveway again, not a dumping ground, not a boundary experiment, just a place I cleared like everyone else. A few days later, I ran into the plow driver by accident at the gas station. He didn't avoid eye contact, but he didn't rush into conversation either, just gave a small nod like we both understood there was nothing left to argue about. And as he filled his tank, he said something under his breath that wasn't quite an apology, but wasn't nothing either. He said, "Didn't think it mattered that much," and I told him quietly, "It always matters when it's yours," and that was the end of it. Driving home that day, I kept thinking about how easily the whole thing could have gone on forever if nobody had ever pushed back. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just consistently enough to make the habit expensive. That was the real turning point, not the snowblower, not the camera, not even the calls, but the moment inconvenience stopped being one-sided. And the strange part is, after all of it, there wasn't anger left, not really, just a kind of quiet clarity, like watching something mechanical finally recalibrate itself after being slightly off for too long. Snow still falls the same way it always did, but I noticed something else too. People don't, they adapt, or they don't, and the system just keeps reflecting whichever one wins out. Looking back now, I don't think it was ever really about snow. It was about boundaries, and how often they only exist if someone is willing to enforce them in a way that can't be ignored, even when it would be easier not to. And if I'm being honest, I still wonder how long it would have gone on if I had just kept shoveling and staying quiet. If that ridge at the end of my driveway would have just become part of my life without me ever questioning it. Because most things like that don't start big, they just keep happening until someone decides they don't have to anymore.